Hi everybody, Allie at My Safe Place again. Just wanted to do a continuation of what I started in the last video, and I realized I said it was going to be a brief, but it wasn't brief, and I don't think any of our histories are brief. When we do this work, we start to uncover a longer story, not a shorter one. And when I think the feeling that I was supposed to keep it brief is very much tied into a belief that my story isn't important and shouldn't be taking up too much time or space in anybody's life, including my own. So your story doesn't have to be brief. My story doesn't have to be brief. If it's too long for you, turn it off. And it took a long time for me to get comfortable with that. And I wanted to continue what I was sort of talking about, the fact that my mother never gave me choices. So I was never trained to believe that I could make a good choice on my own. I was taught to believe that I was incompetent at choice making and that someone else knew better what was good for me. That kind of controlling thing, and that it's insidious. And I never thought of myself when I was younger, living with my parents or with my now ex-husband. I never thought for 1 second that I wasn't a strong person who made good choices. That never occurred to me. It was not something that came into my head. It was only afterwards that I realized how much I had given away of those important choices, how much I had allowed someone else to dictate what my choices were and what they could be. So I only learned to do that by undoing what had already been done first. If that makes any sense at all. I don't think that I could become a good choice maker just by deciding that I was going to make choices rather than be given choices. I really had to discover and go a little deeper within and look at how expertly I had been controlled throughout my life by my family of origin and that belief system that supports that, as well as by my ex-husband. The whole time, I think I really felt like I was making choices and doing the right thing, quote unquote, whatever that means. Right thing for the family, right thing for my kids. And the reality is I wasn't. I was allowing someone else to control me to make those choices. And it's not a question of self-blame or self-deprecation. It's about coming to an understanding of where your choices come in, and not all choices are easy, and sometimes you really have to make the tough ones, and deal with the consequences as they come up. But I can remember just starting very, very simply. As I've mentioned in other videos, I'm very somatic. My symptoms of repressed feelings and emotions and even thoughts comes out in physical illness. And after my second child was born, after my daughter was born, and my children were very close together, they're a year and 3 weeks apart, I suffered from a pretty massive postpartum depression. And that's when I first started seeing a psychiatrist who actually specialized in postpartum depression. And it wasn't until I had a good friend of mine had her baby, and she suffered from really severe postpartum psychosis, which is a whole other story. And I watched her go through this and go to the postpartum clinic and see her being treated and I saw some of her symptoms, that I recognized what had actually been going on with me. So when I started seeing a psychiatrist for the postpartum depression, that's when I started recognizing all these weird little choices that I was making that really didn't support me, and they put other people ahead of me. And that was me making that choice. That wasn't someone else. Just as a silly example, the house we lived in was built in the 1920s, character home, really beautiful. And the living room, dining room was separated from the rest of the house by absolutely gorgeous original French doors. And even after my ex-husband and I had separated, he was very, very allergic to cats and dogs and other animals. So as soon as he was out of the house, the first thing I did was get 2 kittens for my kids and I, to enjoy. And what I did in order to protect other people was I kept these kittens out of the living room, dining room area by using these French doors so they could stay out, so that in the event I had a friend come over who had allergies, they wouldn't be disturbed in the living room. And I can remember discussing this with my psychiatrist and realizing how completely crazy that was. On the off chance that 1 or 2 allergic friends might come over once or twice a year, I was blocking off the kittens, the cats, from enjoying the comfort of the living room. And I realized that kind of thinking permeated absolutely everything I did. Everything was for everybody else and not for my own comfort or even my own children's comfort. Like, they couldn't go into the living room because they would probably leave the door open, and then the kittens would get in, and all hell would break loose. And there was no carpets anywhere, and I kept the couch and everything else covered anyway, because of the obsessive compulsive need to control everything. So I realized that I could actually start to make choices that were better for me and better for my family, and that I could still have friends over. Like, this was like the biggest revelation ever. As crazy as that may sound, that I had been so trained to people please and to accommodate and to make sure that everybody else was comfortable, over and above what would work for me, that wasn't setting good boundaries, that wasn't showing a good example to my children of protecting and being who you are. Like, I have cats. If you can't come over, if it's really that bad, I'm sorry, let's meet somewhere else. Like, that did not get into this weird blocked head of mine. And it was only when I started breaking things down in my own behavior and how I codependently hooked into this belief system that I could actually start to separate from it. And one of the ways that I started to do that was to write a list of some of those behaviors and choices that I was unconsciously making and making them conscious. So the list started with me and how I was feeding into this and what I was doing to help, to enable, that's the word I'm looking for, to enable my own lack of control. I was consistently giving it to other people, not taking responsibility for who I am and saying, I'm doing this because of so-and-so's allergy, or I'm doing this because of so-and-so's fear. So it was always putting the emphasis on someone else and not taking ownership of me. So just writing small lists of ways that I could make myself accountable for me and not put all of the onus of making choices on other people. And this was hard because this is what I'd been taught. This is what I'd been taught my whole life growing up, was you always put other people first. And that's why I was probably assaulted a couple of times, because there was no sense of what me is. And once I'd sort of gotten a better handle on making those lists about what I could do better, it was only then that I was able to start writing lists. And this was very important. And by this time I had switched to the psychologist that I've seen off and on over the years. And when I was working through no contact with my mother 4 years ago, the list making changed. She really agreed with the no contact. My psychologist did. She understood where I was coming from. And what she recommended for me was really important in terms of keeping an eye on not falling back into always putting someone else's needs first. And what that was creating a list of the little things and the big things that my mother and my sister had said or done to me or to my kids that was crossing the boundary, that was hurting us, that displayed a lack of respect or understanding, or that was out and out abusive. And what she told me was that a lot of the time for codependents or for people who've been trained to put other people's needs and wants first is that we actually minimize our own abuse. Oh no, it was nothing. I was fine. No. It wasn't abuse. No, it wasn't that bad. No, I chose that. So she insisted that I start writing this list because it was so easy also to forget. And she said, and whenever you have that feeling of wanting to reconcile with them or go back with them and they haven't done any work on it, it's just you missing them or you feeling like, oh, it wasn't that bad. She said, I want you to look at these lists and go through it. And she said, and I can almost guarantee you that once you see all of those things enumerated out for you, that you've written in your own language, in your own handwriting, that you go, oh, fuck no. Screw that. And it was so true. And I did it about my mother. I wrote this list about my mother. I wrote a separate list for my sister, and I wrote a list for my ex-husband, although he was a lot easier to let go of, trust me. But with family of origin, there's also a lot of pressure. You know, there's a lot of sense that, oh God, you can't not talk to your mother. Who does that? Like mothers are sacred cows. Sorry for the analogy. It has nothing to do with anything other than this idea that you're not allowed to touch mothers, like motherhood is somehow conferring this sainthood on you. So those two kinds of lists were crucial in getting me forward. I really needed to see it in writing where my own thought process and behaviors was contributing to this catch-22 of always being caught and allowing other people to make choices for me and control me in a way that I was totally allowing. And I needed to make lists of my own behaviors, but also make lists for their behaviors because they were all covert, my mother and my ex-husband. There was nothing like, I wasn't beaten. There were never any bruises. Everything was always really passive aggressive, really covert in terms of provocative, trying to provoke a reaction and then playing the victim when I had the guts to say no, if I ever had the guts to say no or stand up to it. So I can't thank my counselor, my psychologist enough for this idea of writing a list. It's like a shopping list. It's just, and as you remember things, it doesn't even have to be in chronological order. Just putting it down. And I still do that. As some of the memories come up, I'm adding to the list. Now I don't have to check the written list anymore because it's pretty solidly in there at this juncture, but I'm adding to the list, and I'm finding it's useful in other areas of my life as well. So I'm hoping that that kind of idea, if you're having doubts about yourself, um, and this isn't about reaching in and digging for traumatic memories. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about some of the things that we're able to gloss over and just say, it wasn't that big a deal. I think when you start to see the accumulated effect and the number of times that this has happened to you or to your kids, you start to understand just how bad this can be. It's death by paper cut. So write down all the paper cuts. That's kind of the way I've been doing it, and it's really, really allowed a huge amount of clarity on this. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.